Hello and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Bryant and I'll be your host for this webinar. Please make sure your microphones and web cameras are disabled during the presentation to provide for a smooth recording. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You're welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments and insights. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on November 4th, extra, read all about it, Finding Your Family History and Newspapers with Catherine Grant. And that'll be at Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. If you'd like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we're pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be giving a presentation on building your genealogical toolkit. James has over 35 years experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of Genealogy Star blog. He is an author and co-author of over 25 books on genealogical research and has presented at expos and conferences around the US, Canada, and Europe. He served for 10 years as a missionary at the Mesa, Arizona Family Search Library and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. James has 7 children, 34 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. And we're glad to have James here with us today. And James, if you're ready, we'll turn the time over to you.
Okay, thanks. Glad to be here today. There was a comment that came in on the chat just before I started here a few seconds ago. Yes, I was on a webinar yesterday for My Heritage Live, and it was a very interesting one, and thought that's always interesting. And it's not really for My Heritage; it was for Legacy Family Tree, which is Legacy Webinars, which basically is owned by My Heritage, but is an organization that's based here in the United States. Today we're going to talk about building your genealogical toolkit. Kind of have to think a little broader than all of those nice tools I have on the screen there. I wonder if there's anybody out there that could really name how or identify what each of those are. But there's a lot of kinds of tools out there, and when we talk about genealogical tools, really, what are they? Well, it's pretty simple. They're anything and everything that expedites the acquisition of genealogical information. So your genealogical tools consist of two or three different kinds of things. First of all, they consist of the things that you have learned, and we'll come back to that. And then they also consist of the records and all of the information that's out there that's available. All of those records are really tools that allow you to discover your genealogical antecedents, your ancestors who came before you, and your relatives that live out there. And then the third area, of course, is is a lot of technology, because today we have a great deal of technology. So part of that technology involves the internet and large databases and digitized records that have been put up, billions and billions of digitized records that are available. And it also involves visiting large libraries. Libraries can be looked at as a tool of finding out information. And libraries and archives and historical societies and genealogical societies and all sorts of things out there that help us and can be used by us to answer questions about our ancestors. So basically, if you look at your pedigree and think about as much information as you do know, you'll recognize pretty quickly that your pedigree determines the tools you need. Genealogists as such have a base of things that they need to know. There is a basic genealogy type knowledge that people need to acquire in order to adequately and realistically find information. There are some research tools that are necessary to acquire, learning about how to do research and how to find the records that are available. And then there are things that we need to learn about the records themselves. But when we look at our pedigree, we find out that there may be some other tools out there that we might need to know. And some of those might involve learning some level of a foreign language, or more than one foreign language. Could be quite a few different languages if you come from different places, if your ancestors lived in different places around the world. And so all of these factors can be considered to be tools that we have to start acquiring. And if we are already much involved in family history, then there may be many of these areas that we need to become more proficient in and learn more about where things are available and what kinds of things we need to know and learn. Essentially, all that you learn during your life will help you with your genealogical journey. Some of the things that I have in my background that I basically thought were just kind of random things that I learned or knew about have become very, very central into what I've been able to accomplish and the information that I've been able to use from my own experience in helping people find their ancestors. For example, many years ago, now I'm, quite old, but many, many years ago, I was asked to serve a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I did so by learning Spanish and serving for 2 years in Argentina. Now, that Spanish that I learned back then became invaluable for me because I developed further knowledge of Spanish through school and through more experience, and lived in Panama for a couple of years. And in addition to being in Argentina, and as a result, I used Spanish considerably during the time that I practiced law in Arizona. And that was another tool. I learned about law and became an attorney. In addition to that, I took part-time jobs during the time I was in school, and all of those jobs, the ones that were more that were associated with the universities, involved libraries. I worked in the library at the University of Utah, and then I worked at the law library for the time I was in law school at the Arizona State University in Tempe, Arizona. So all of those things, you think, oh, well, those are just life experiences. Well, I do research in Latin America now because I read Spanish, and I can do research in Spain. Because of my other language backgrounds, I've been able to do research in most of the European countries. My legal knowledge has helped me do research in probate and court cases, and in land and property cases, and records around the United States and around the world. There's just it seems like everything that I've learned has had some bearing on my ability to do genealogy. Now, maybe you have a completely different maybe most people would have a completely different set of background, but your background and the things that you've learned during your life are the things that will assist you in evaluating and finding and learning about genealogical records and making those discoveries that will help you to build your pedigree and discover who your ancestors and relatives are. So, but as far as genealogy was concerned, my genealogical journey really started with a book. And the book was The Researcher's Guide to American Genealogy by Val Greenwood. And why this was pivotal to me was that I started doing genealogy and simply knew nothing about it. Zero. I mean, I knew nothing. I was at ground zero in genealogy. Not even with all the other experience. I knew how to do research. I knew how to do all sorts. I read those languages, things like that. But I could not, I knew nothing about how you were supposed to do genealogy. And this book, basically, and I'm not recommending this as such, but I think it's a really good reference. And this is in the 4th edition, so it's been improved over the years. But this book basically gave me the perspective of what you actually did and what kinds of things you needed to look at in order to do genealogical research. That's not something that it's just not instinctive. You have to learn. It's a learned activity. You have to actually expend time and effort learning about the kinds of things that you need to know to find records, to use the records, and to adequately be able to read and interpret what's there in the records and make it into a coherent, something coherent that you can use to advance understanding and finding people. So this is what started me. Although your path may begin in a different way, you may take some different path. You may have actually, unlike me, I had never been to a conference. I didn't have any relatives. I didn't have an aunt or a grandmother who looked over my shoulder or helped me to understand genealogy. But many people have those kinds of experiences. But whatever your pathway is, that's what you need to understand is once you get started on that there's some things that you have to do and some tools that you have to acquire in order to make any progress. And the first of those, of course, is to learn how to do genealogical research. Now, genealogical research is historical research. Now, what does that mean? It means we're relying upon preserved historical records. Those are records that were from whatever source, and there's a huge spectrum of records that begin with individual records such as Bible records and journals and letters, and go all the way through the spectrum to formally kept records like census records and tax records and court records and probate records and all of the kinds of things that are formally recording information about people and the people's lives as they live those lives. So our first job is to begin to understand what that research process entails and how to understand the research. And the next basic tool is, once you understand the process of research, which is where to go, is that you find out that the research is based upon the records. So we need to learn about the records and all the different kinds of records that are there. And as I mentioned with the book on the Researcher's Guide, the research process involves identifying all of these different kinds of records and then learning enough about the individual types of records to use the information that's in there. So if you have never had any knowledge of or any connection to formal legal documents like wills and probate files, basically it seems like a foreign language, especially if you go back in time 100 years or more. You'll find that the records are very use language and terms and things that are entirely are different. They're not the kinds of things you run across. It's not the language you hear in day-to-day conversation, and it's nothing that you would have heard going all the way through school unless you happen to become a lawyer. So the basic idea here is that there's information out there that you need to make an effort to understand and to look and begin to become what you call a self-starter. A lot of people are basically in the situation where they say, well, what do I do next? What kind of thing do I need to do now? And now if you go back to what I said in an earlier slide about your pedigree being the driving force of what you need to know is very simple. For example, if you were looking at a person on your pedigree and that person had lived in, say, born in early 1900s and died a few years ago, then the question that comes up is, what records would that person have been created about that person's life? Well, everything from, for example, school yearbooks to newspaper articles to tax records, maybe military records, maybe all kinds of things. Now, once you have that concept of those are the kinds of records that a person's life may have generated, then you take that next step, which is, okay, now how do I find these records? And then we get into a lot of finding aids. In other words, things that help us identify where to go and how to find these records. And fortunately, today, online, we're practically handed on a plate all those records, a lot of records, especially for that time period in the 1900s and the latter part of the 1800s. There's just overabundance of records. It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean that the task might not take some considerable effort and some considerable learning, but that is the process. So where do you go to begin? You begin with your own records, your home records. And this has been said by so many genealogists over the years. It's probably it's almost like a standard statement that genealogists make is look to your own personal records. Now that's great if you happen to have any personal records, but if you don't have any personal records and you haven't found them, you may have a lot more of a challenge. In my case, I did have some. I had some records that had been generated by my family, and I began the process of looking through those records. And of course, I started this when I had already been an attorney, a lawyer for many years. I had already been practicing law. Well, not for many years, but I'd been practicing law for quite a few years. And when I looked at the records, I said, these are in a mess. They were contradictory, they were partial, they were not complete. They had some of the information was obviously not verified or correct, and it was just kind of a really interesting process. We refer to that process as in genealogy as the survey process. That means establishing what everyone else already knows about your family. The hope there is that you avoid duplication of effort, that maybe somebody's already done some work and then you can utilize that work. Fortunately today, which I didn't have back when I started, we have some online tools. The primary one, and I'll talk about it in a minute, is the Family Search Family Tree, because it's a collaborative, it's really what it is all of the information that's been compiled over the last more than 100 years by literally millions of people. And so it basically gives you this beginning with your home records concept, a very, very big legs up, gets you there fast. So the survey, what has already been discovered on your family lines is the process. Now, most of us today, many of us, maybe not most, but many of us today can do that by simply going online and getting into one or more of the big online database programs. If you were to log in and to Family Search, register as a user and get onto Family Search, you may find out that that there has already been a significant amount of information generated by your family, your relatives, and that's right there on Family Search. But that's only the start. Now, the process that I did of a survey took me 15 years approximately before I would say I had a handle on what work had been done in my family. I reached the point where I had, on most of the family lines that I had investigated, I'd found where I figured that the correct information had ended, and there were many lines that went back and back and back and back in time, and none of those lines turned out to be correct. That there was just no substantiating information, historical information to support these lines that went back into the Middle Ages and before, clear back to the AD, 800 AD. In fact, some of the lines actually went back to Adam, Charlemagne and Adam. But basically, this was the process that I went through. So what took me 15 years can now be done probably in about a week, maybe a little longer, because basically what you need to do is sit down with the programs like Family Search and go through it step by step, looking at what sources, meaning the documents, historical documents, have been attached or added as sources to the individuals back in your family tree that will give you some confidence that the information in the family tree is correct. Now, when you reach the point where there are either no sources listed or the information is faulty, and that key information that you're looking for is basically whether or not there are specific records that show the parents' names and some information about each person in that pedigree. And if they could have 50 records about the individual, but if they don't have those crucial records that tie them and tell you that these records show that this is the parent, these are the parents of this person, then you have reached the end of that particular line. And when I did that, like I said, after about 15 or so years, I was more than fairly familiar with all of my lines back several generations, and I had reached the end in almost every single one of those lines. And so at that point, something had to change, and we had to start doing something different. And that point was when I had to start really becoming serious about learning how to do genealogy and learning about the steps that could be taken. So one point that's important to understand is that learning isn't a waste of time. You used to say, well, I should really be getting in and learning and getting into finding these names. Well, if you learn how to do it very early on, it'll save you a lot of time later. And especially, you won't fall into the category of those people who have come to me over the years, and they always say the same kinds of things. It's always interesting to have somebody come up to me in the family history library or any other place where I'm helping and say, James, can I tell you something? And I said, yeah, sure. They say, well, I've been doing research now and in many cases, I've heard like 15 up to 30 years. And in one case, they said, I've been researching for 30 years on my family line, and I figure I've done a lot of work. But guess what? I just found out through a DNA test that I'm not related to my parents. All of a sudden, this person has a whole new family line to start over with, which, by the way, that's really a good advantage in some cases. You may have just kind of lost your momentum on doing research for 30 years on the line, but now you have a whole new line to do. But you can imagine the kinds of things. Now, that can also happen because somebody made a mistake and they've started and been working on the wrong line for so many years. Not just because they find out with DNA, but simply find out that the person they thought was the parent was not the parent. So learning early will save time, and that's important. What we're looking at is the Family History Guide. This is a free and it's the fhguide.com. It's a free learning, research, training, and activities center for family history. It's the authorized family history, family search partner for education, and it is structured, sequenced, and efficient way to learn how to do family history. So this is there's a way to get into it that's not painful. It's step-by-step instructions. You can skip through the parts you know, and you can look at the parts, and it links to thousands of external sources of handouts and videos and um, lots of things in there that help you to get even more in depth with all of the different parts of learning how to do research, learning the programs that are involved, like Family Search and Ancestry and MyHeritage and Find My Past and many other things. Once again, it's the FH, G-U-I-D-E, the FHguide.com. And the core of the family history guide for genealogists is the countries area. And in this countries area, we have put together, and I'm part of the organization here that sponsors the Family History Guide, and my wife and I are actively involved in helping to correct, update, and support the information that's there. So this is in part our product, and it says basically all the countries of the world that have significant genealogical records, there are links to where those records are and how to learn about what the records are. And it includes every state in the United States and every county in every state in the United States. It also includes all of the counties in England, and then it goes into detail with all of the other countries. So here's your kind of basic outline of the kinds of records that you can look at, and then it gives you explanations about how those records can be used or where they might be found. So here's your research outline. This is where you can go to see what kinds of things you need to know in order to make progress in any particular line. So once you got to that point where you have some knowledge and this kind of simultaneously happening is you need to start recording your ancestry with a family tree program or website. Something you need to write this stuff down, and people still out there who are sort of paper bound, and I get this comment all the time that I really can't understand something unless I write it down on a piece of paper. Well, the answer to that is you really need to do that, perhaps, and sometimes that helps you to learn and to understand. But today, in order to avoid duplicating the effort of lots of people that have already done a lot of work, it's just really important to start recording your family on a program or website. You need to choose one out there and make an effort to learn that program. That's another one of the tools that you're going to learn is a program or programs or websites that will help you. The world of records out online is, the number of records is going up so fast. I can't describe exactly how to get to it, but there's if you go to familysearch.org, and if you go to the menu bar there on familysearch.org, you can click on a link there under the search tab. And one of the search tab is there's a new record in there about records tab that's different than been there before. When you click on that, you go to a web page on familysearch.org that shows where all the records that are not yet incorporated into the historical record collections, and only some of which have been put into the catalog yet. So it's kind of the holding place for the records for Family Search. And there's a counter in there that goes up about five new records every second, all day long, every day. And there are millions, just on that one website, familysearch.org, there are millions of records being added. Another example is that on MyHeritage, I've been watching that, and I mentioned I did a webinar for them yesterday. But the point, I've been watching that website, and in the last just few months while I was putting together the information for the webinar and doing a PowerPoint on it, the records had gone up. 100 million records had been added to that website. And it's just, this is what's happening on lots of websites. Ancestry and all the other websites are just constantly adding records, and many, many, many hundreds or thousands of additional websites that you probably have never heard of and will maybe become acquainted with as you go try to do some research. So, but you do need to start recording that information, and a good place to start with that is to systematically, step by step, add your information. Maybe if you go into familysearch.org, and that's your choice of places to start, much of this initial entry might be there, but there might be a lot of information that needs to be supplemented and corrected, and there may be a lot of duplication and other things maybe that occur in the families. But that's often dismissed by people as being a waste of time, or I really don't, I don't have time to do all that kind of stuff. The answer is that's what we do. That's the core process. Some of the core processes of being a genealogist is organizing and correcting and systematically clarifying the information that has been accumulated and that continues to be accumulated. So this is not something where we say, oh, well, now I've got to go another duplicate. Oh, this is terrible. No, basically the duplicate tells you that there's been more than one person who has looked at this family, and every duplicate is just a flag that tells you that there's more information perhaps out there than you are presently in possession of. Okay, so you might be learning things. Make sure your information comes from a reliable historical source. Every time you add stuff to any of your family tree, whether you have a desktop program, online program, one of the big database programs, be sure that the information you add has a historical record. So if we look at that, and I ran into this, like I mentioned a moment ago, I ran into this rather early in doing genealogical research, because I found out that the information was not supported. And it wasn't like back in the 1300s or 1600s or anything really remote. It was people who had lived, and some of whose lives overlapped my own. In other words, I had people who were my contemporaries, that the information was not complete and in some cases not correct. My grandfather, who I never knew, who died before I was born. One grandfather who died before I was born, my paternal grandfather. There was a lot of information sort of out there. People knew that he had been killed in a tragic accident, but the information that they had about the accident and the place where the accident occurred was not accurately reported. Nobody had recorded it properly. Basically, they got the wrong county because that wasn't the county where he was killed. And so this is the kind of thing that there was processes. That wrong county thing was my great-grandfather, his father, had the same problem. They had it recorded that he was born in San Bernardino County, California, And that was not correct because San Bernardino County did not exist at the time that he was born. So all of these things had to be corrected and had to be clarified so that when we talk about genealogy, we need to understand that everything we do is dependent on everything we already have done. So unless we are correct and accurate going back step by step, what we try to do in the future will not be accurate. And the further we go from being strictly accurate, the further our ultimate information is going to be very, very inaccurate and hard and not correct. Now, this is a difficult topic to address because we really have to bite the bullet and understand that we need a certain level of technological competence today to adequately do genealogy. You know, the issue is duplication. If I spend 10 hours in the library finding the next ancestor in this particular family or the next relative, finding the children of this family, for example, that I'm researching and looking for their information, how do I know that someone else out there hasn't already found all that information for me? How do I know that? So when I'm sitting there in the library, I should always be as aware as possible as what's going on around me in the greater genealogical community. We seem to forget this very simple fact about life, is that we have two parents, but we also have four grandparents, and we're talking strictly biological relationships. We might have a lot of other people in that same category, meaning foster parents, guardians, adopted parents, all sorts of things. But strictly biologically, we have two parents, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024. Okay, so think of how many people are descendants of those. Those are all your relatives. And the relatives out there, there's a percentage of them, just by natural percentage, who are going to be interested in genealogy and will be doing their own research. And that's been happening now for well over 100 years. They're actually the current genealogical research that's available can be dated back as far as 200 years of collecting information about families. And that 200-year period contains an awful lot of information. So our connection to that information is through the electronic media. And whatever level that it is, that's when you need to know a little bit about it. Now, of course, I mentioned the Family History Guide, which is an online source. And so there's kind of a threshold there that you'll have to be able to use a computer and the internet sufficiently to get on to the Family History Guide. But we also, on the Family History Guide, have a lot of information about acquiring a technological background for PCs and Macs and all kinds of computers and mobile devices and all sorts of things. So however you decide to get into the internet, there is a pathway that you can use to get into and understand about your family. The very items, the computers and the smartphones and the cameras all become tools. One of the things that I had to do early on was either make photocopies of everything, which was kind of a drain on my limited resources, or today I don't have to do that. Today I can use my phone, which has a very good camera, and I can walk in to the library and sit down. Of course, they have to allow me to do this, but fortunately, both the family history libraries at BYU and in Salt Lake are tolerant of cameras. And so basically I can go in, instead of writing down notes and copying everything out of a book or copying things off of records, I can simply make digital copies of the information and use that information directly without having to ever transcribe it or or copy it down or put it in some other format, is that copying time is where you're actually wasting time. There's no reason to spend your time copying that information down. So one thing that you could use as a goal is to update and improve your computer skills. Make sure that you understand how to use the computers, but not only how to use the computers, but start learning about all of the resources there are for finding records. Okay, so I'm here in Provo, Utah, and I have the BYU library, which by the way is closed because of the pandemic for the time being, and we're all working remotely. But it's only because I have the remote connection that I'm able to do this webinar. And also it's only because of this remote connection that I'm not completely frozen out of doing research, because I can now do a substantial amount of my research. Now, from time to time, I actually find out that the only place I could find the record would be as if I were sitting in the library looking at the record. But that doesn't mean I can't do other things, waiting for this all to pass so that I can get back into the libraries. But on the other hand, the amount of information that I am able to access through the computers is just overwhelming. And so it's just, we can just continue to do our work. And we can also communicate with the libraries, and in many cases, we can ask them to find those records that we can't get it any other way, and have them, these people who can still work in the libraries, actually help us. So there's ways to do this, but we also need to remember to update our computer skills. Now, there's a lot said in the world about the technology gap. Usually older people are kind of charged with the idea that they don't really know much about computers, and so they really can't take advantage of it. And that's true. There's old people who have very few computer skills. I live in a community here, and part of the city of Provo, where there are a lot of retirees. And frankly, I have friends around me in my neighborhood who have very, very limited computer skills. But I also have people around me who have spent their entire lives in the computer industry. And some of us have been on computers now for 30 and 40 and 50 years, not just for the last few years. So the idea that there is in fact a gap, and it's, if you are in the situation where you don't feel comfortable being on computers and doing research and learning, then that is your goal. That should be your objective, is to overcome that gap. Learn the information, seek out classes, use the resources that are online to learn. The BYU Family History Library uploads these webinars to the YouTube channel. That's YouTube, our BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. But youtube.com is like an endless, almost, it seems almost infinite, but I know it's not infinite, but it's growing so rapidly that it's practically infinite as far as any user is concerned. But the information that's there about computers and finding the information. This morning I had a problem with a program that I could not remember how to get into this particular program, how I had to get a screen capture program to work. And so I immediately went to YouTube. I had to watch the same video like 3 times before I could understood what they were talking about, but eventually I was able to solve the problem. It was quite simple once I watched the same YouTube video 3 times. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. Now, websites and computer programs. I went to this website, this GenSoft Reviews. The developer of the website's a friend of mine, and this has been around for a long time. online. And all you do to find it is to type in Gen soft reviews, all one word. It'll come right up. You find the website immediately from a search, Google search. And I really wanted to bring this up because if you look at the number right there, there are 1,039 genealogy programs that are reviewed on this website. And there are 5,804 reviews. Okay, so a lot of us are used to Amazon, and some of us are used to looking at other websites like Amazon, and that we know the star system, for 1 star, 2 star, 3, 5 star. And this is where the ranking of all those different programs occurs. Now, if you know anything about reviews, you know that the people who have a bad experience with the product or with the program give a bad review, and the people who have a good experience seldom give good reviews. So there are usually some bad reviews about programs, but I think this is one of the windows of opening up some of these genealogical tools that most of us wouldn't have imagined were there. Were you really aware that there are over 1,000 genealogy programs out there? So you just might want to look through these lists and see some of the things, and you might find some things in there, some of the programs that a lot of us use regularly, and I'll mention one of them, RecordSeek. If you haven't ever looked at RecordSeek, it's a program that lets you make get a source citation from almost any website and put it into Ancestry or Family Search. There's things like that out there that are all listed here, and then you can learn about what kinds of things are out there that might help you with your genealogical work. And this is the address. It's gensoftreviews.com, all one word. So if you want to just add .com to Gensoft Reviews, you'll get there. And here's one, I'm going to repeat this, but I'm going to suggest that what we have from the family history, from Family Search, Family Tree, is remarkable. It's an extraordinary program, and it is not a problem. The problem is the data that was being put into the problem, not the problem itself. This is a fabulous program, and it's free, really free, not free to start out, and you have to pay when you get a certain number or whatever. This is free. And in addition to that, we have, and it's collaborative, meaning what I've said earlier is that what's in here is the collaboration and contribution of thousands, millions of people over 100 years or more. And we have partner programs. Of course, these partner programs are free to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but they are also programs that are valuable for themselves. For example, American Ancestors for New England research, for early colonial research in New England, is the go-to place. It is a fabulous resource. You can get a free subscription to it, but it's a limited subscription, and I pay for the paid subscription, even though I have a free one, because I get a lot more records that way, and and I'm doing research there, and it's been helping me do some very specific research, particularly on my Mayflower ancestors over the last few years. Actually, just this last year. Just some kind of admonitions here as we kind of wrap this up. Be sure to check your work. Everyone, including me and everyone else, can make typographical errors, transcription errors, not impossible. I found lots of my stuff that I thought I was doing real carefully and found out that it wasn't as careful as I thought. So we need to learn the tool of going back and checking our work, using that as something that we look at not just once, not just twice, but a continual effort to make sure that the information that you're putting into the programs or down on your paper, wherever you're doing it, is correct. And here at the end, I wanted just to throw in some additional tools, just some other things out there. Those tools, one of them I've mentioned already is the BYU Family History Library YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com and put in BYU Family History Library. It'll take you right to the website. We're getting close to 500 videos on about every kind of topic you can imagine. And this has been a many years. We've been here in Provo now for 6 years, going on, our next year will be 7 years. So we're starting our 7th year here. And for almost all of that time, I've been involved in the videos, and so has a lot of other people. And so we have, as a joint effort at the library, put in all of these different videos. And also, if you ever find something that you want to know about that we haven't done a video on, you're welcome to contact me or anyone at the library and say, do a video on this topic. In fact, we have our address is right on the BYU Family History Library website, and we welcome suggestions. So basically, the other one that I kind of want to point out is the FamilySearch.org Research Wiki, which is under the Search tab on the startup page for FamilySearch.org. And there are now over 93,000 articles on every conceivable aspect and almost every kind of record available around the world in almost every country. Obviously, there are countries out there where our access here in the United States or in other countries, even within those countries, access to genealogical records is extremely restricted. But it's surprising how many records there are and how much is available in many of the countries around the world. And the Research Wiki is almost inexhaustible source of links and information and how-to articles on how to do and find the research that you need to know. And don't forget libraries, archives, and other record repositories. All of the people out there accumulating this information. For example, almost every major university in the United States has a library. I would assume they don't become a major university without a library. And in almost every one of those libraries has what's called a special collections library. And the special collections are vacuuming up, in a sense, all of the handwritten manuscripts and records and limited publication material and everything else that you can, some of the things you can't imagine that go into those libraries. And if you're not aware of what's in the libraries in your own town, in your own area, whatever libraries you have access to, I realize the limitations today with the pandemic, but we still have to recognize that these libraries, even local libraries, we found some remarkable collections of newspapers and other kinds of records that aren't available anyplace else except in those libraries. And so I've used local libraries across the country to find a lot of information that's been helpful. Now, the last one, just kind of a little window a little probably unexpected window. There is a program out there called the Internet Archive. It's archive.org, archive.org. And it has billions of records, including a substantial number of records that have genealogical utility and use. And interestingly enough, you can check out the books, all of the books, or many of the books, many millions of the books that they have on that record. Right now, I think the last I looked, there was like 17 million books on the Internet Archive. And of that, you can check them out. This is an open library. You register, You can find the books that you want to look at, and I found specific genealogical books that I needed, and you can check them out for 2 weeks and have them there on your computer to use for 2 weeks. It's free. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that I think is important to us as genealogists, that we understand that there are these other aspects of learning and becoming acquainted with all of the opportunities that we have out there to learn and to begin to appreciate the vast amount of information that's sitting out there. And if you like to read, this is an outstanding place to get a lot of books, and they're complete. Now, granted, you have to read them online. Both my wife and I read almost 100% of the books that we read now on our iPads or tablet computers. So we've done that. I have people who say, well, I can't look at those screens because they're, well, get real. The computer screens on those do not blink. They're not blinking back and forth. They're not like they used to be. They are essentially just exactly like a printed page. And so we have begun this process. So I just thought I'd throw this in at the end because probably you haven't heard of the openlibrary.org. And if you have, type that in, have a look at it, sign up, and you're on your way to checking out books. Okay, well, thanks for watching. Appreciate this opportunity. Do we have any questions? Anything that we need to look at today?
Thanks, James. It looks like we do have a couple questions in the chat box. Let me just...
Do you want me to stop sharing so you can get on?
You're good. You're good. You can leave it.
Okay.
It's all good. Let me just scroll up and find the questions really quick. Kathy asks, do you ever do seminars on which softwares to use on home computers?
Say that again. I didn't catch the...
Oh, she says, do you ever do seminars on which software to use on home computers?
Oh, which software?
Yeah.
Yeah, almost everything I talk about is what software to use. I think there's one, I just did I can't remember the name of it right this second, but I just did one on what genealogists don't know about what's online, and all I did was go through a bunch of websites that usually people don't. When I tell them about them, almost invariably they say, "Oh, I didn't ever know that." So this is kind of thing that there's just so many things out there. It's like the Internet Archive and Open Library. There's just all sorts of places out there on the internet like that. I mean, for instance, Colonial Williamsburg has a library and they have online sources. You can go, the New York Public Library has a huge collection of online sources. The Newberry Library in Chicago has a website called the Atlas of Historical County Boundaries that I probably use almost every time I'm on doing research. They're just all these things out there. And yes, I continually do that and have that in presentations. So if you go to the YouTube channel for the Family History Library and look up, just browse through and look at the records, you'll see there's lots of stuff in there on websites. Thanks. What else?
Awesome. Just scrolling down through the chat. You got a lot of thank yous for your presentation, James.
Oh, you're welcome.
Awesome. Jay asks, is there a video on your MyHeritage/Legacy webinar?
Yes, and they're free for a period of time on Legacy webinars. So if you go in and just do a search for Legacy webinars, and you'll find that there are free ones for a period of time. It's really a subscription website. It's a very nominal amount. And they have webinars, they usually have 2 or 3 a week. So there's quite a few that go through there. And the person who runs it, his name's Jeff Rasmussen. We've been friends for many years, and Jeff just told me they've gone well over 1,000 webinars on their website. So that's a major source for information.
And Kathy asked, what is the location of the picture on the screen?
Oh, this is Dinosaur National Monument in eastern Arizona, in eastern Utah. It's right on the border with Colorado. It was a dinosaur quarry where they found all the bones for lots of the museums around the world. And this is called Split Mountain, and you can barely see the river at the bottom, but that water down there at the bottom is the Green River. The Green River comes down out of the mountains in Colorado and ends up in joining the Colorado River down about in the middle of Utah. It's called Split Mountain. It's one of the, when you're there, you just stand there and you go, this looks like something somebody made up for a movie. It doesn't look real. When you're standing there, it doesn't look real. So it's really strange.
Awesome. And it looks like that's all the questions in the chat box. If anyone has any last questions, feel free to post them. But thanks again, James, for presenting.
Okay, well, you're welcome.
Awesome. And let me just share my screen really quick.
Let me stop sharing.
There we go. All right, and just like to remind everyone about our webinar next week on November 4th with Catherine Grant, extra, read all about it, finding your family history in newspapers. That'll be at the same time, 5:30 p.m. And we hope everyone can join us for that. So hope to see you next week. And thanks for joining us today, and have a great day.
Thanks. Goodbye.